She was beaten by the ranch hands, until the cowboy said, "Touch her again, and I'll end you." The sound of her crying cut through the afternoon heat like a knife through leather. He heard it before he saw anything, heard the choked, desperate gasping of someone trying not to make noise, trying not to give them the satisfaction. Then came the laughter. Low and mean. The kind of laughter that came from men who'd forgotten what it felt like to be human. The cowboy stood at the corner of the livery stable, one hand resting on the rough wooden beam, the other hanging loose at his side. He'd been in town less than an hour, just passing through. That's what he told himself every time he rode into a new place. Just passing through. Never staying. Never getting involved. But then he saw her. She was on her knees in the dirt behind the general store, her dark hair falling loose from its pins, her dress torn at the shoulder, so badly he could see the pale skin beneath, already bruising. Blood ran from her nose and split lip, dripping onto her hands where they pressed against the ground, trying to hold herself up. 3 ranch hands stood over her in a half circle, their boots kicking up dust, their hats casting shadows across their faces. One of them, a tall man with a thick mustache and a belt buckled the size of a man's fist, kicked dirt at her and laughed when she flinched. "Should have kept your mouth shut, girl," the tall one said. His voice was casual, like he was commenting on the weather. "Mr. Garrett don't like troublemakers, especially ones who can't mind their own business." Another one, younger, with red hair and freckles that made him look almost innocent, spat tobacco juice near her hand. "Maybe she'll learn now. Maybe she'll remember her place." The third man said nothing. He just watched, his arms crossed, a cold smile on his face like he was enjoying a show. The cowboy felt something tighten in his chest. Something old and ugly and familiar. He'd seen this before. Different town. Different girl. Same kind of men who thought power gave them the right to break whatever they wanted. His hand moved to his hip, fingers brushing the worn grip of his Colt revolver. The gun he'd sworn he wouldn't draw again. The gun that had already taken too much from him. He started walking. His boots made no sound in the dust. The ranch hands didn't notice him at first. They were too busy circling her like wolves around a wounded deer. But the girl saw him. Her eyes, swollen and wet with tears, lifted and met his. For just a moment, something passed between them. A silent question. A desperate hope. The cowboy stopped 10 feet away. "That's enough," he said. His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The kind of weight that made men turn around. The tall ranch hand turned first, his hand dropping to the pistol at his belt. His eyes narrowed as he looked the cowboy up and down, taking in the dusty trail clothes, the scar jaw, the gun tied low on his hip. "This ain't your business, Drifter," the tall man said. "Keep walking." The cowboy didn't move. His pale blue eyes stayed fixed on the man's face, unblinking. "I said that's enough," he repeated. The red-haired one laughed nervously and glanced at his companions. "You know who we work for, mister. You know whose ranch you're messing with." "Don't care," the cowboy said simply. The tall man's face darkened. He took a step forward, his hand still hovering near his gun. "Big Garrett Ranch runs this whole territory. We do what we want. And right now, we're teaching this little thief a lesson she won't forget." "She ain't a thief," the cowboy said quietly. "And you're done teaching." The girl made a small sound, half sob, half gasp. She was shaking now, her arms trembling as she tried to push herself up. The cowboy's eyes flicked to her for just a second, and what he saw there made something crack open inside his chest. Fear, pain, but also defiance. She hadn't broken. Not yet. The tall ranch hand took another step forward, his fingers wrapped around the grip of his pistol. "You got a death wish, stranger?" The cowboy's jaw tightened. He could feel the old familiar pull, the cold focus that used to come over him before a fight, the part of him that knew exactly how this would end if he let it. But then the man kicked the girl again. Not hard, just enough to knock her forward, to make her cry out and collapse fully into the dirt. Just enough to prove he could. And something inside the cowboy snapped. "Touch her again," he said, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper, something that sounded more like a promise than a threat. "And I'll end you." The silence that followed was absolute. The tall man froze, his hand still on his gun. The red-haired one took a small step back. Even the quiet third man straightened up, his eyes widening slightly. Because they heard it too. The certainty. The truth. This wasn't a bluff. This wasn't some drifter running his mouth. This was a man who had killed before and would do it again without hesitation if they made him. The cowboy's hand rested on his gun now, fingers loose but ready. His eyes never left the tall man's face. "You boys work for the Garrett Ranch," the cowboy said softly. "That means you got families, got wages, got something to go home to." He paused. "I got nothing, which means I got nothing to lose. So ask yourself, is teaching this girl a lesson worth dying in the dirt today?" The tall man's face twisted with rage and indecision. His pride wanted to draw, but his instincts, the part of him that had kept him alive this long, was screaming at him to walk away. Finally, slowly, he took his hand off his gun. "This ain't over," he said through clenched teeth. "Mr. Garrett's gonna hear about this. And when he does, I'll be here," the cowboy interrupted. "You tell him that. Tell him I'll be here." The tall man spat in the dirt, shot the girl one last hateful look, then turned and walked away. The other two followed, glancing back over their shoulders like they couldn't quite believe what had just happened. The cowboy watched them go until they disappeared around the corner of the saloon. Only then did he let out the breath he'd been holding. He turned to the girl. She was still on the ground, still shaking, her hands pressed against her face now as she sobbed quietly. He approached slowly, carefully, the way he would approach a wounded animal. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling down a few feet away. "Hey, it's all right now. They're gone." She didn't look up, just kept crying, her shoulders heaving. The cowboy reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a worn handkerchief. It wasn't clean, but it was cleaner than the dirt. He held it out to her. "Here," he said gently. Slowly, she lifted her head. Her face was a mess of blood and tears and dust. Her left eye was swelling shut. But when she looked at him, really looked at him, he saw something he hadn't expected. Strength. She took the handkerchief with trembling fingers and pressed it to her bleeding nose. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The afternoon sun beat down on them. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. "Why?" she finally whispered. Her voice was hoarse and broken. "Why did you help me?" The cowboy looked at her, at this girl he'd never met, in a town he'd never been to, and he didn't have an answer. Not a good one anyway. Because the truth was complicated. The truth was buried under years of running and hiding and trying to forget. The truth was that when he looked at her crumpled in the dirt, he saw someone else. Someone he'd failed a long time ago. "Because it was right," he said simply. She stared at him like she didn't believe those words existed anymore. Like she'd forgotten that right and wrong were things people still cared about. He stood up slowly and offered her his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then reached up and let him pull her to her feet. She swayed, unsteady, and he caught her elbow to keep her from falling. "You got somewhere safe to go?" he asked. She shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Not anymore." The cowboy nodded slowly. He should walk away now, should get on his horse and ride out of this town before the Garrett Ranch came looking for him. That was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But when he looked at this girl, at the bruises on her face and the fear in her eyes and the way she was still standing despite everything, he knew he wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "Come on," he said quietly, still holding her elbow. "Let's get you cleaned up. Then you can tell me what you did that made them so angry." She looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd seen her, something like hope flickered across her face. She didn't know his name, didn't know where he'd come from or why he'd stopped. But in that moment, standing in the dust and blood behind a general store in a town that had turned its back on her, she knew one thing for certain. He'd saved her life. And somehow, in ways neither of them could understand yet, that single moment of mercy had changed everything. She hadn't said a word since they climbed the stairs. The cowboy sat in the hallway outside her room on the second floor of Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, his back against the wall, his hat resting on his knee. It was past midnight. The oil lamp at the end of the hall had burned down to a flicker, casting long shadows across the faded wallpaper. Inside the room, he could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, like someone afraid to make too much noise, like someone waiting for the door to break open. He'd paid Mrs. Holloway 2 weeks in advance for the room. The old widow had taken one look at the girl's battered face and asked no questions, just nodded and handed him the key. That was the way of the frontier. Some things you didn't need to explain. The cowboy closed his eyes and listened to the silence. 3 days had passed since he'd pulled her from the dirt behind the general store. 3 days since he'd spoken the words that had put a target on his back. 3 days, and she still hadn't told him her name. She wouldn't talk, wouldn't eat more than a few bites of the bread and soup Mrs. Holloway brought up, wouldn't look at him directly, always keeping her eyes down or turned toward the window. But every night, through the thin walls, he heard her crying. Soft, broken sobs that she tried to muffle with her pillow. And every night he stayed in that hallway listening, making sure no one came up those stairs who shouldn't. On the morning of the 4th day, he found her standing at the window. The sun was just rising, painting the desert sky in shades of red and gold. The cowboy had dozed off sometime near dawn, his head tilted back against the wall, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver. He woke to the sound of her door opening. She stepped into the hallway barefoot, wearing the clean dress Mrs. Holloway had given her. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, and the bruises on her face had turned from red to deep purple and yellow. Her left eye was still swollen, but she could open it a little now. She didn't look at him, just walked past, silent as a ghost, and went to the window at the end of the hall. The cowboy stood slowly, his joints stiff from sleeping on the hard floor. He watched her for a moment, unsure whether to speak or let her be. She stood with her hands pressed against the glass, staring out toward the horizon, toward the direction of the Garrett ranch. He walked over quietly and stood a few feet behind her. "You waiting for them to come?" he asked softly. She didn't answer, didn't move, just kept staring out at the empty land beyond the town. The cowboy looked at her reflection in the glass, at the way her shoulders were drawn up tight, at the way her fingers trembled against the window. "They won't come here," he said. "Not to the boarding house. Not with witnesses." Still nothing. He let out a slow breath. "But they'll come eventually. Men like that always do." Finally, she spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from disuse. "Then why did you help me?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke. The cowboy didn't have a good answer. Not one that made sense, anyway. He'd been asking himself the same thing for 3 days. "Because someone needed to," he said finally. She turned her head slightly, just enough that he could see the edge of her face in profile. A single tear ran down her bruised cheek. "No one ever has before," she whispered. Those words hit him harder than any fist ever could. He thought about the ranch hands, about the way they'd laughed while she bled, about the townspeople who must have seen something, heard something, but turned away, about a world where a girl could be beaten in broad daylight, and no one would stop it, about his sister. The memory came unbidden, sharp and painful as a knife between the ribs. Sarah. 16 years old with blonde hair and their mother's smile. Sarah, who'd trusted the wrong man in the wrong town while her big brother was off trying to prove he was tough enough, fast enough, mean enough to make a name for himself. Sarah, who'd screamed for help and no one came. By the time he'd gotten back to that little mining town in Colorado, it was too late. The man was gone. His sister was in the ground. And the townspeople told him they were sorry, but these things happened, and there was nothing anyone could have done. He'd been running ever since. Running from the guilt, from the rage, from the sight of that fresh-turned earth and the wooden cross with her name carved into it. Until 3 days ago, when he'd heard another girl crying and couldn't walk away. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She was silent for a long moment. Then, so softly he almost didn't hear it, "Elena." "Elena," he repeated. The name felt foreign on his tongue, but right somehow. I'm Cole. She nodded, but didn't turn around. They stood there together as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the window. A freight wagon rattled past on the street below. Somewhere a rooster crowed, late and off rhythm. What did you do? Cole asked. What did you do that made them so angry? Elena's hands pressed harder against the glass. Her breath fogged the window in small clouds. I saw something, she said. Something I wasn't supposed to see. Cole waited, patient, silent. I worked for them, she continued, her voice barely audible. At the ranch. Cleaning, cooking, mending. My father died 2 years ago. Left debts. The rancher, Mr. Garrett, he said I could work them off. Her hands began to shake, but the debts never got smaller, no matter how much I worked. And then I started noticing things. Mexican families who'd come to work the cattle drives, they'd disappear. The men would say they moved on, went to another ranch. But I saw the pay ledgers, saw names crossed out with no wages paid. Cole felt something cold settle in his stomach. One night, Elena continued, I couldn't sleep. I went out to the well for water, and I heard voices. Behind the bunkhouse, Mr. Garrett and his foreman talking about the canyon, about the ravine on the north end of the property. She stopped. Her whole body was trembling now. I went there the next morning, before dawn, and I found them. Found what? Cole asked, though he already knew, already felt the sick certainty of it. Graves, Elena whispered. So many graves. No markers. No names. Just dirt and rocks and silence. The morning light seemed dimmer suddenly. Colder. That's when they caught you, Cole said. Elena nodded. I ran back to the ranch. Tried to act normal. But the foreman, he knew. He always knew. That night they came for me. Said I'd stolen from Mr. Garrett. Said I was a liar and a thief. They beat me in front of the other workers. A warning. And then they dumped you in town. To finish it, Elena said. Where everyone could see. Where everyone would know what happens to people who see too much. Cole's jaw tightened. His hand moved to his gun without thinking, fingers wrapping around the familiar grip. This wasn't just about protecting one girl anymore. This was bigger, darker. The kind of evil that festered when good people turned their backs. You got proof, he asked. Papers? Witnesses. Elena reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out something small. She held it up to the light. A wooden cross. Rough carved, no bigger than her palm. The kind a mother might make for her child. I found this in the ravine, she said. There were others. Toys. A doll. A child's shoe. Her voice cracked. They weren't just killing workers. They were killing families. Cole felt something break loose inside him. Something he'd kept locked down for years. The rage. The grief. The desperate, aching need to make something right in a world that had taken everything from him. There's more, Elena said. She pulled out a folded piece of paper from her other pocket. I took this from the foreman's office. The night before they caught me. It's a ledger. Names. Dates. Amounts paid to the sheriff to look the other way. Cole took the paper and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was neat and precise. Column after column of names he didn't recognize. Dates going back 3 years and payments marked in red ink. The last name on the list made his blood run cold. Sheriff William Carson. $500. Paid monthly. They own the law, Cole said quietly. They own everything, Elena replied. She turned away from the window, finally, and looked at him. Really looked at him. Her eyes were dark and deep and full of a pain that had no words. You should go, she said. Leave town. Before they come for you too. Cole folded the paper and handed it back to her. I'm not going anywhere. You don't understand. I understand plenty, he interrupted, his voice harder now. I understand that men like Garrett think they can do whatever they want because no one will stop them. I understand that you're the only person brave enough to tell the truth. And I understand that if I walk away now, you'll be dead within a week. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Then we'll both be dead. Maybe, Cole said. but at least we'll die standing up." She stared at him, and in that moment, something passed between them. A recognition, an understanding. Two people who'd been broken by the world, finding each other in the wreckage. "Why?" she asked again. But this time, the question was different. Not "why did you help me?" but "why would you die for this?" Cole thought about his sister, about the wooden cross in the Colorado dirt, about all the times he'd run instead of fought, hidden instead of stood, because he was too afraid of losing again. "Because someone needs to," he said simply. Elena clutched the wooden cross to her chest and nodded slowly. And for the first time since he'd found her bleeding in the dirt, she didn't look quite so broken. But as the morning sun climbed higher and the town began to wake below them, Cole knew the hardest part was still coming. The Garrett Ranch would come for them. And when they did, he'd have to become something he'd sworn he'd never be again. The sound of hoofbeats woke the town before sunrise. Cole was already awake, sitting in the chair outside Elena's door, his revolver resting across his lap. He'd learned long ago that dawn was when bad men came, when the light was dim enough to hide faces but bright enough to see targets. He heard them before anyone else did. 5 horses, moving slow and deliberate down the main street. The kind of slow that wasn't about caution. It was about making sure everyone saw, making sure everyone knew. Cole stood and moved to the window at the end of the hall. Through the dusty glass, he could see them. 5 riders, all wearing the brand of the Garrett Ranch on their vests. The foreman, the tall man with the thick mustache from 3 days ago, rode in front. Behind him, the red-haired ranch hand and 3 others Cole didn't recognize. Hard men with rifles strapped to their saddles and pistols on their hips. They stopped in the middle of the street, right in front of the boarding house. The foreman dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the dirt with deliberate heaviness. He looked up at the building, his eyes scanning the windows like he could see through the walls. Elena Martinez. His voice cut through the morning silence like a blade. "We know you're in there, girl. Time to come home and face what you done." Cole's jaw tightened. His hand moved to his gun. Behind him, he heard Elena's door open. She stepped into the hallway, her face pale, her hands clutching that small wooden cross. "Don't," Cole said without turning around. "Stay inside. They'll burn the building," Elena whispered. "They'll hurt Mrs. Holloway." They won't do anything," Cole interrupted. "Not to you. Not today." He walked past her toward the stairs, checking his revolver as he moved. 6 rounds. Fully loaded. He'd cleaned it the night before, oiled it, made sure every part worked the way it should. Just like the old days. "Cole, please." Elena's voice broke. He stopped at the top of the stairs and looked back at her. In the dim morning light, with her bruised face and frightened eyes, she looked so much like Sarah it made his chest ache. "Stay away from the windows," he said quietly. "No matter what happens." Then he descended the stairs. Mrs. Holloway was already in the front room, standing behind the curtain, her wrinkled hands pressed against the glass. She looked at Cole as he came down, her eyes wide. "They're from the Garrett Ranch," she whispered. "They own half this territory. The sheriff won't stand against them. No one will." "I will," Cole said simply. He walked to the door and opened it. The morning air was cool and sharp, carrying the smell of horses and dust. The foreman stood in the middle of the street, his hands resting on his belt, that same cold smile on his face. The other 4 ranch hands had spread out, forming a loose semicircle, their hands hovering near their weapons. Cole stepped off the porch and into the street. "You the one who threatened my men?" the foreman called out. Cole didn't answer, just kept walking until he stood about 20 feet away, close enough to talk, close enough to shoot if it came to that. The foreman's smile widened. "Got some nerve, Drifter. I'll give you that. But nerve don't stop bullets." "Neither does a big mouth," Cole said. The smile faltered. The foreman's eyes narrowed. "The girl's coming with us," he said, his voice harder now. "She stole property from Mr. Garrett. She's got debts to pay, and she's going to pay them one way or another." "She didn't steal anything," Cole said. "And she doesn't owe you a damn thing. That ain't your call to make, stranger." "I'm making it anyway." The foreman laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He looked at his men, then back at Cole. You know who I am? I'm James Dalton, foreman of the biggest ranch in 3 territories. I got 5 armed men behind me, and you got nothing but a worn-out gun and a dead man's luck. Cole's expression didn't change. Then you better hope you shoot straight. The laughter died. Dalton's hand moved closer to his pistol. This is your last chance, cowboy. Walk away. Get on your horse and ride out. We'll forget this ever happened. No, you won't, Cole said quietly. You'll kill her the moment I'm gone. Just like you killed all those families in the canyon. The street went silent. Dalton's face darkened. What did you say? I said you're a murderer, Cole replied, his voice carrying across the empty street. You and Garrett both. And everyone in this town knows it, but they're too scared to say it out loud. Behind the windows of the buildings lining the street, Cole could see faces. The general store owner, the blacksmith, the banker, all watching, all silent. Careful, Drifter, Dalton said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. You're making accusations you can't prove. I don't need to prove anything, Cole said. I just need to stop you. Dalton stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. Just cold calculation. You're good, I'll give you that, Dalton said. You talk like a man who's seen trouble. Maybe even caused some. But talking don't win fights. He glanced at his men. And you're outnumbered 5-1. Cole's hand hung loose at his side, fingers near his revolver. Numbers don't matter if you're slow. You think you're fast enough to take all 5 of us? No, Cole said honestly. But I'm fast enough to take you. And that's all that matters. The words hung in the air like smoke. Dalton's smile disappeared completely. His eyes went flat and dead, the look of a man who'd killed before and was about to do it again. Your funeral, he said. His hand moved. But Cole was faster. The world slowed down the way it always did in moments like this. Cole's hand swept to his hip, fingers closing around the grip of his Colt, thumb pulling back the hammer as he drew. The motion was smooth, practiced. Muscle memory from a life he tried to leave behind. Dalton's gun cleared leather first, but Cole's was level first. The shot cracked across the morning like thunder. Dalton stumbled backward, his pistol falling from his hand, his eyes wide with shock. He looked down at the red stain spreading across his chest, then up at Cole. You, he started to say. Cole shot him again. Dalton fell into the dirt and didn't move. The other 4 ranch hands froze, their hands on their guns, but not drawing. They stared at their foreman's body, then at Cole, then at each other. Cole kept his revolver level, smoke still curling from the barrel. His face was calm, almost sad. He had his chance to walk away, Cole said quietly. You got the same choice. The red-haired ranch hand swallowed hard. His hand trembled on his pistol grip. You killed Dalton. He drew first, Cole said. Anyone here want to say different? Silence. The ranch hands looked around at the faces in the windows, at the townspeople who'd watched everything, at the body in the street. You're dead, one of them finally said. Mr. Garrett can come himself if he wants, Cole interrupted. But you boys are gonna ride back to that ranch and tell him something. Tell him the girl's under my protection now. Tell him, if he wants her, he'll have to go through me. And tell him, Cole paused, his voice dropping lower. Tell him I know about the canyon. About the graves. About everything. The red-haired hand's face went white. You don't know what you're messing with. I know exactly what I'm messing with, Cole said. Question is, do you want to die for it? No one answered. Cole gestured with his gun. Pick him up. Take him home. And don't come back unless you're ready to join him. For a moment, no one moved. Then slowly, reluctantly, 2 of the ranch hands dismounted and walked over to Dalton's body. They grabbed him under the arms and dragged him back to his horse, loading him across the saddle like a sack of grain. The red-haired hand looked at Cole one last time. This ain't over. I know, Cole said. They mounted up and rode out, heading west toward the Garrett ranch. The sound of hoofbeats faded slowly, leaving only silence and the smell of gunpowder in the air. Cole stood in the street for a long moment, his gun still in his hand. His heart was pounding now, the adrenaline catching up to him. His hand started to shake, just a little, just enough that he noticed. He hadn't killed anyone in 3 years. Had sworn he never would again. But here he was, standing over blood in the dust. Again. Behind him, he heard the boarding house door open, heard soft footsteps in the dirt. Elena stood at the edge of the porch, her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide. "You killed him," she whispered. "I did," Cole said. "He would have killed you." "I know." She walked toward him slowly, carefully, like she was approaching something wild and dangerous. When she reached him, she looked up at his face, searching for something. "Who are you?" she asked softly. "Really?" Cole holstered his revolver and looked down at her. At this girl he'd saved. This girl who'd brought all his ghosts back to life. "Just a man who made a choice," he said. Around them, the town began to wake. Doors opened. People stepped out onto porches and into the street. The blacksmith, the shopkeeper, the banker. All of them staring at the blood in the dirt. At Cole. At Elena. No one said a word. But Cole could feel it. The shift. The change. He'd drawn a line in that street. Had stood up to the Garrett Ranch when no one else would. And now there was no going back. The war had started. And before it was over, more blood would stain this dusty frontier town. But as Elena reached out and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his callous palm, Cole realized something he'd thought he'd lost years ago. He had something worth fighting for again. The leather journal hit the table with a sound like a judge's gavel. Cole stared at it, his hands still trembling from the gunfight, gunpowder residue dark under his fingernails. They were back in Elena's room at the boarding house, the door locked, the curtains drawn. The morning sun filtered through the fabric, casting everything in gold and shadow. Elena stood across from him, her face pale but determined. She'd retrieved the journal from a hiding place beneath the floorboards, wrapped in oilcloth, protected from moisture and time. "Open it," she said quietly. Cole's throat felt tight. He reached out slowly and opened the worn leather cover. The first page was dated 3 years earlier. Names written in neat script. Juan Morales. Maria Sanchez. Carlos Rivera. Beside each name an amount. Wages owed. Work completed. And then in red ink, a single word stamped across each entry. Disposed. Cole's stomach turned. He flipped through more pages. More names. More families. More red ink. The entries became more detailed as he read. Locations. Methods. The foreman's initials beside each one. And, at the bottom of every page, a signature he recognized even though he'd never seen it before. Marcus Garrett, owner of the Garrett Ranch. "There are 43 names in that book," Elena said, her voice shaking. 43 people who came to work the ranch, who were promised wages, land, a future, and who disappeared into that canyon instead. Cole looked up at her. "Where did you get this?" "From the foreman's office," she said. "Dalton kept it locked in his desk. I think he was using it to make sure Garrett couldn't turn on him. Insurance, in case things went bad." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I broke in one night when they were all in town. I knew something was wrong. Too many workers leaving without saying goodbye. Too many families just vanishing. And that's when they caught you," Cole said. Elena nodded. "Not that night. But the next day, Dalton knew someone had been in his office. He started watching me, asking questions. I tried to act normal, but he could tell." She swallowed hard. 3 days later, he accused me of stealing. Said I'd taken money from the ranch safe. It was a lie, but no one would believe me over him. That's when they beat me. When they threw me in town to finish the job. Cole closed the journal carefully, his jaw tight. They weren't just killing them for money. No, Elena whispered. They were selling them too. The children especially. There are notes in the back pages about buyers. Men from mining camps who needed workers they could control, who wouldn't ask questions about age or consent. The words hung in the air like poison. Cole stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. The blood was still there in the dirt. Dalton's blood, dark and thick in the morning sun. He'd killed men before. Bad men. Outlaws and thieves and men who'd drawn on him first. But this was different. This wasn't about survival or self-defense. This was about choosing a side. "We need to take this to the marshal," Cole said finally. "The territorial marshal in Silver Creek. He's 2 days' ride from here. Far enough from Garrett's reach that he might actually listen." "The sheriff here won't help," Elena said bitterly. "He's on Garrett's payroll. It's in the journal." Cole nodded. He'd figured as much. Small-town sheriffs rarely stood against the men who paid their wages. "Then we ride around him," Cole said. "Leave tonight. Take the back trails through the canyon." Elena moved to stand beside him at the window. "Garrett will send men after us." "I know. They'll try to kill us before we reach Silver Creek." "I know that too." She looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his face. "Then why are you doing this? You could leave. Right now. Get on your horse and ride away from all of this. No one would blame you." Cole was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the question she was really asking. The question he'd been asking himself since the moment he'd stepped into that street. Why stay? Why fight? Why risk everything for people he'd never met and a girl he barely knew? The answer came slowly, like dawn breaking over mountains. "My sister's name was Sarah," he said quietly. "She was 16 when she died. Blonde hair, blue eyes, smiled like sunshine." His voice caught. "I was supposed to protect her, but I was too busy trying to prove I was tough, trying to make a name for myself as a gunfighter. So I left her alone in a mining town with men who saw her as something to use and throw away." Elena's hand found his arm, her fingers gentle on his sleeve. "By the time I got back, she was already gone," Cole continued. "The man who killed her had left town. The sheriff said there was nothing he could do. The townspeople said they were sorry, but these things happen." He turned to look at Elena. "I spent 3 years running from that. 3 years telling myself it wasn't my fault, that I couldn't have stopped it, that one man can't change anything." "But you don't believe that anymore," Elena said softly. "No," Cole said. "I don't. Because I've seen what happens when everyone believes it. When everyone decides it's not their problem. When everyone looks away." He gestured toward the journal. 43 people died because good people decided it was easier to stay silent. "And I'll be damned if I let one more person die because I chose to run." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Cole said. "I know you risked your life to try to stop this. I know you could have run, could have stayed quiet, could have pretended you never saw those graves. But you didn't. You stood up. And that takes more courage than any gunfight ever could." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "What if we fail? What if Garrett kills us before we reach the marshal?" "Then we fail," Cole said simply. "But at least we'll fail trying. At least we'll die knowing we chose right over easy." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her dress pocket and pulled out the small wooden cross her mother had carved. She held it in her palm, looking at it like it was the most precious thing in the world. "My mother gave me this before she died," she said. "She told me it would keep me safe, that as long as I held on to it, I'd never be alone." She closed her fingers around it. "I thought she was wrong. After she died, after my father died, after the ranch took everything from me, I thought God had forgotten about me." "Maybe he didn't forget," Cole said gently. "Maybe he just sent help in a different way than you expected." Elena looked up at him, and something passed between them. Understanding. Trust. The kind of bond that forms between people who've seen the worst of the world and chosen to fight it anyway. "We should leave tonight," she said. "As soon as it's dark." Cole nodded. "Pack light. Bring only what you need. We'll take the canyon trail north, then cut east towards Silver Creek. If we ride hard and stay off the main roads, we can make it in 2 days. And if Garrett's men catch us," Cole's hand moved to his revolver, "then I'll do what I did this morning. As many times as it takes." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Cole checked his horse, a sturdy roan mare he'd bought in the last town. He loaded saddlebags with provisions, hardtack, dried beef, a canteen of water. He cleaned his gun again, loaded fresh cartridges, made sure everything was ready. Elena packed her few belongings in a small canvas bag. The wooden cross. A change of clothes. The journal wrapped carefully in its oilcloth. That was all she had, all she owned in the world. As the sun began to set, Cole met with Mrs. Halloway in the front room of the boarding house. The old widow looked at him with knowing eyes. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "Tonight," Cole confirmed. "And we won't be coming back." Mrs. Halloway nodded slowly. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small cloth bag. "Take this. It's not much, but it'll help." Cole opened the bag. Inside were gold coins, maybe $20 worth. More money than the old woman probably had to spare. "I can't," he started. "Yes, you can," Mrs. Halloway interrupted firmly. "That girl needs protecting, and you're the only one fool enough or brave enough to do it." She put her weathered hand on his arm. "My husband was a marshal, you know, territorial marshal down in Arizona. He used to say that the law only works when good men are willing to stand behind it, when they're willing to risk everything to make sure justice gets done." "What happened to him?" Cole asked quietly. "He stood up to a rancher," Mrs. Halloway said. "Man who thought his money made him untouchable. My husband arrested him anyway, brought him to trial, made sure he faced justice." She smiled sadly. "The rancher hanged. But his men came for my husband 6 months later. Shot him in the street in broad daylight." Cole's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said. "He died doing what was right. And I'd rather have 30 years with a good man who died for justice than 50 years with a coward who lived by looking away." She squeezed his arm. "You're a good man, Cole. Don't let the world convince you otherwise." Cole didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and pocketed the coins. As darkness fell, he and Elena slipped out the back door of the boarding house. His horse was saddled and ready, tied to the post behind the building. He helped Elena up into the saddle, then mounted behind her. The town was quiet. Most people were inside, doors locked, windows shuttered. They knew something was coming, knew that the death of the foreman would bring consequences. Cole guided the horse through the back alleys, avoiding the main street, heading north toward the canyon trail. The moon was just a sliver in the sky, barely enough light to see by. But that was good. Darkness would hide them. Darkness would buy them time. As they reached the edge of town, Elena turned to look back one last time, at the buildings silhouetted against the night sky, at the place that had taken everything from her. "I'm never coming back here," she said softly. "No," Cole agreed. "You're not." They rode into the darkness together, carrying with them a journal full of names and a truth that could bring down an empire. Behind them, the town of Red Mesa faded into shadow. Ahead of them, the canyon opened like the mouth of some great beast, dark and unknown. Cole knew that before this was over, more blood would be spilled. More lives would be lost. The rancher would send his men, hired guns and killers who wouldn't stop until Elena was dead and the journal was destroyed. But as he felt Elena lean back against him, trusting him to keep her safe, trusting him to see this through, Cole realized something that made his chest ache with an emotion he'd thought was dead. He wasn't running anymore. For the first time in 3 years, he was riding toward something instead of away from it. Toward justice. Toward redemption. Toward a chance to finally make right what had gone so terribly wrong. He would never be the man he was before Sarah died. Would never be free of the guilt and grief that followed him like a shadow. But maybe, just maybe, he could be something better. A man who stood when others ran. A man who fought when others surrendered. A man who chose courage over comfort, truth over silence, and justice over survival. The canyon walls rose around them, dark stone reaching toward the stars. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The night air was cold and sharp, smelling of sage and dust and possibility. And as they rode deeper into the darkness, carrying their truth like a lantern against the night, Cole finally understood what his sister had been trying to teach him all those years ago. That one person can't change the world, but one person choosing to stand can inspire others to do the same. And sometimes that's enough.